Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to this LinkedIn Live with me, Justin York, where we're going to talk about data eras, and more specifically, we're going to try and work out which data era your ecosystem is in. You will have seen on the post that came out about this live that there's an image there, and it has 4 segments on it. We're going to come to that in a minute. But the thing is, when we think about eras, we're either in a prehistoric era or we're in a AI-enabled era or somewhere in between. But most organisations want to work on or operate in the right-hand side. They want to be in the AI-enabled super high-speed environment. But many are trying to reach that future. They're trying to reach that goal without understanding fully the data ecosystem that is supporting it. What is the foundations that are holding all of that up? And more importantly, what about the behaviours ecosystem that is even supporting or underpinning or making that data ecosystem work? So on that image there is these 4 areas. On the left hand side we've got the data swamp, the prehistory, we've got the dinosaurs, lots of interesting stuff about that. And then we move along from there and we move into what we like early discovery, where we've got cavemen that bashed together 2 pieces of flint, made a spark and created fire. Right, so we're getting more understanding, we're being a bit more innovative. And then we move along to the skyscraper sort of area, where we've understood that we need solid foundations. If you want tall buildings, you need solid foundations. If you want things to stay up, you need solid foundations. And then we move over to the right-hand side, which is all that AI-enabled, super high-speed environment where everybody wants to live. The problem is that while everybody wants to be over there, moving quickly, using AI and making confident decisions, the technology in and of itself does not automatically create that data maturity that you need in order to work or operate effectively in the right hand side. And so your AI environment, your AI future is there, but the ecosystem is still somewhere in the past, in the swamp, in the cavemen or the skyscrapers areas, depending on how good your organisation is around its data ecosystem. So the question for you is, which era does your organisation actually operate in? And we're going to go and have a run through some of those now and have a little look at some of these things. So we'll start on the left-hand side with the swamp, with the dinosaurs. And in that environment, what we find is that data is scattered, it's difficult to find. Could be anywhere. There is no real ownership or accountability for that data. There's nothing documented that says this person is accountable for this set of data, they make the decisions and all that kind of stuff. Definitions, or the use of definitions, differs across teams. Now I use bi-weekly all the time. I should really come up with a new one, but bi-weekly is good enough. It can mean twice a week or once every 2 weeks. But you can't have a definition that says bi-weekly is twice a week or once every 2 weeks, because that is not clear. There is no clarity there. So we need to get clarity on these things. And we find that reports are depending on manual fixes. Lots of stuff is happening in the background. People are still fixing spreadsheets, fixing the sources of the data that provide those reports. Knowledge sits with individuals, people that create the workarounds or the shortcuts, people that have got all this understanding about how an organisation works. It sits in their heads. And because it's sitting in their heads, if they leave, then all that knowledge walks out the door with them. But even with the best handover notes in the world, you're not going to get all of it. There'll be something that they'll think is absolutely obvious, but it really isn't. And then what we find is the fact that somebody has to fix the same piece of data 6 times a week at the same time of day, it's just normal, it's just the way it is. It's how things happen in this organisation. That is not a great way to exist. So organisations will have, particularly medium and large type organisations, will have enormous amounts of data these days, but they will have very little shared understanding of it. So if we move into the second part, think about the cavemen. We're bashing together 2 pieces of flint, creating a spark, creating fire, being a bit more innovative. We're evolving now, we're discovering data governance in this instance. We're finding data governance. And what we find is organisations begin to, they'll write a policy, which is great. They'll produce an operating model. They'll appoint data owners and data stewards. They'll have role definitions for these things. They might have glossaries or data catalogues where we are defining the data. We may even have standards that are published that we want for this data, assuming that we've asked the right people what they think is good enough. And we may even have data governance forums that exist that sit to discuss all of these things. But that just means that data governance is existing on paper. It's not existing practically. And it doesn't exist practically because we have owners that are not making decisions. They don't really understand their role. They've read the role description and all that kind of thing, but they don't really understand it. We have stewards who are in the stewardship trap because they've got all the responsibility but very little authority. So they're not really being able to get to do things. And if you've got data owners who are passive, they're not making those decisions, then it's really difficult to be a data steward. The data governance forums or committees, they all meet, but they just kick the can down the road. And they kick the can down the road because, what we'll do is we'll wait until the next meeting and see if that's resolved itself. Maybe the data fairies have come in overnight and fixed that, waved a magic wand, and that issue has gone away. So they end up discussing the same things. They're talking shops, they're not achieving anything. This all means that the business teams continue with their workarounds, they continue with their shortcuts because they see nothing better. Because they see nothing better, they will keep doing it. It's the path of least resistance. They do what gets the job done. And maybe, and this happens quite a lot, governance or data governance is the preserve of the data team, which belies the necessary understanding that the business has to own the data. Data teams don't own the data. The business has to understand the data. So the organisation has discovered data governance, but it has not yet embedded it. So then we move across into the skyscraper world, and what we're doing is we're starting to see some embedding of data governance. We're starting to see some structure beginning to form. So we're moving away from paper now, and the organisation is beginning to understand what the critical data is that it has. Critical data is super important because you could spend a huge amount of time looking at things that are not critical, are not really giving you any bang for buck. There's no massive business outcomes or impacts from it. So we spend a lot of time doing that. In the meantime, critical data is building up risks and issues and all those types of things in the background. And it's the critical data that will trip you up, not the other stuff. The other stuff isn't going to do that. And we think about where it's located. So where is this data? In the days of old, you would find that data existed in single systems. So HR data existed in HR, finance in finance, inventory in inventory systems. And if you wanted to report about that, then you got it out of those systems. Of course, that meant that you couldn't have fancy dashboards that joined loads and tons of stuff together. But the point is, the data is no longer located in single systems. It's unlikely that organisations who don't understand their ecosystems will not know exactly where it is. So it would be a source system, it might be a warehouse, there could be a data lake. You might even have a third-party vendor, for example, that looks after paying your people, in which case data is moving over there. But then we have to understand how it moves. And I go back to the days of old. We used to have interface control documents. I talk about these things quite a lot. These days, people may call them data contracts. But inside those documents, we knew which data moved, when it moved, how often did it move, what was the purpose of it, who was responsible at each end of that pipeline or that link for that data. So if we had a failure, we knew who to talk to, but not just one person, we had at least two people. So if one wasn't there, we could talk to somebody else about it. So we could get this level of connectivity, this level of understanding of how the data moves. But not only does it move through internal pipelines, it may also, if you've got a third-party vendor, move off your site to somewhere else. In which case, what is moving, what are the controls, how are they handling it when they get the data? So who is using it and why are they using the data? because not everybody needs to see everything. And so we need to know who is using it, what they use it for, and is it fit for purpose? Because people need to validate stuff before they use it. Because if they don't do that, we end up using data that may not be the right stuff. We need to know who is accountable for it. Who is the owner of that data? Remember, owners, if they're active, are making decisions, allocating resource, remediating things, removing blockers. They're making things work. And then we also have to understand what is the level of quality that is required for that data. And we also have to understand that in most cases, we need to ask the consumers of the data, what is the required standard? Data owners necessarily don't need to be creating standards for data, because if they do, they're sort of marking their own homework. So now we're shifting from creating the governance assets, the stuff on paper, the policies, the operating models, all that kind of stuff, and then we're using those things, those assets, to help us improve decisions, improve the controls, improve the quality and the outcomes for the organisation. So a key question for you to think about is your governance documentation actually changing how people work? And then what we do is we move across then finally into the fourth part, we move across into the high speed, the intelligent system, maybe into an AI-enabled world that we're living in. And what we see there is that the trusted data is easier to find. Ownership is active. I keep talking about this, but you still keep hearing about owners that are passive. Owners need to be active, making decisions, allocating resource to get stuff fixed, talking to other data owners to get blockers removed, remediating things that is the most or are the most critical things. Owners have to be active, otherwise it doesn't work. The quality and lineage are visible to everybody. Everybody can see how the data moves around. You're not actually seeing the data itself, so you don't know that Mrs. Smith, 35 Cheltenham Road, bought an insurance policy for £600. You don't see any of that. But what you do see is that name, policy number, address, etc. moves through a particular system. Having that visibility means that you can identify some risks. You can identify where the controls should be placed. You can check whether those controls are actually working or not. So at this point in time, data governance is actually underpinning and supporting delivery for the organisation. And we would hope that AI is used with clear purpose and accountability. And we've seen recent news reports about various AI tooling that have got out of the preserve or the reserve and have been hacking other organisations, which is, depending on where you sit, which side of the fence you sit, could be worrying, or you think, well, great, this is a magic improvement. But you can't just get to that era by purchasing some technology. You can't just get from the swamp or the cavemen. You can't just get to the AI-enabled world by buying another tool, another thing in the stack. Those things are not going to do anything unless you understand what's going through that tooling. So AI readiness depends on your data readiness, your data governance readiness, and your behavioural readiness, because behaviours are underpinning all of these things. So a formal data ecosystem is only part of the picture. It isn't the whole thing. We have to think about the behaviours of the people that are operating within this ecosystem. So we've already touched on a few things where, people are thinking about the path of least resistance. They are taking the shortcuts and workarounds because it gets the job done. But behaviours will be relying on things like a lot of spreadsheets, people keeping old versions of spreadsheets, people who are updating spreadsheets without actually getting source data. They're just cutting and pasting or updating values. All of these things can create problems. I don't have a problem with spreadsheets per se. I think they're very useful. But if they're going to be used for business decisions, then you need to have rules and controls that sit around those things. We might be seeing manual adjustments that are happening to those spreadsheets, to reports. It's like the leader sticks his head around and says, is that report ready yet? So I'll be with you in 5 minutes. I just need to change this particular value. I just need to go and speak to Bob Smith down the road and he'll tell me what the value is that needs to go in there. So we make the manual adjustment. We might have lots of unofficial reference files knocking about. And what that means is that people are creating files or spreadsheets or whatever that are becoming their reference documents. But they may not be the centralized reference documents. And if we end up in that where we don't have these centralized reference documents, then we've got all sorts of different versions that are happening. Organisations will have to rely on people's personal knowledge, this stuff locked up in their heads. Because that knowledge, if you happen to ask the right person on the right time of day, on the right day, about the right question, you might find out about a workaround or shortcut, that kind of thing. But you need to do those things consistently. So people will keep all this knowledge in their heads. When they leave, they take it with them. It's just gone. You end up not even understanding why the workaround was created in the first place. They will have those workarounds and shortcuts. These things will exist. It's because it gets the job done. People are celebrated for getting the job done. In the meantime, all the issues that underpin those particular fixes that they are doing still exist. We're not fixing any of those. So we're thinking more about the shortcuts, the workarounds, getting the job done than we are thinking about actually making the data good for us to be used. And we also might find some informal approval routes. So for example, maybe there is a formal approval process, but somebody's worked out that actually if you miss out steps 2 and 3, it doesn't really matter because that person will just approve it anyway. But there's a reason that we have formal approval routes, and that's because we need to make sure that stuff is being done the same way. So these things keep organisations working, these behaviours keep organisations working, but they also hide the weaknesses that exist in your ecosystems. So your architecture will show you how the data should be moving. Your behaviour system is going to tell you how it really works. So when we think about that, we need to understand how do we work out which era we are in, because otherwise it's all a bit pointless. There's loads of stuff, but it doesn't really do anything. So when we think about this, we need to ask ourselves a series of questions. We need to know, do we know, can we identify our critical data? That's the stuff that has the most impact if it goes pear-shaped. Do we know where it comes from? This may be internal or it may be external. For example, I worked in an organisation that had 3 different areas of the business, had grown up sort of organically on their own with their own budgets and that kind of stuff. And we had 3 different versions of a postcode database from different suppliers, and they were all different. So suddenly we had data, it was critical data, we knew what it was, but we didn't know where it came from, and we didn't really know what the right standard of it was. Can you explain how it changes? So when we have lineage and we can see the data run through systems, can you actually explain what happens to it en route? Another example. I worked in an organisation where we had a file left a source system. It contained 18 fields. When it arrived in the warehouse, it only had 12. So 6 have disappeared somewhere. But we checked all the ETL and nothing was dropping the data out. So something somewhere was dropping it. It was happening in the pipeline. Unintentionally, but it happened anyway. But there's all sorts of hassle about trying to figure out what that was. We go back to bi-weekly. Are we using definitions in the same way? Are they transparent? Are they interpreted in the same way by people? Do your data owners make decisions? Are they allocating resource? Are they getting stuff done? Do we actually report issues and resolve them in the source systems? Because if we don't, and we just keep fixing recurring issues, then we're going to be doing that forever. Do people feel psychologically safe to raise issues or challenge the data without being blamed or dismissed or even get extra work to do? And can the AI teams, can the people who run those models actually explain the data that they are using, because they should understand and be able to explain what it is they are using, and they should understand why it's being used. So we go back to the 6 big things. What have you got? Where is it? How does it move around? Who uses it? What for? Who owns it? What's the quality of it? Now, the thing about these tests, these questions, is that the number of confident answers gives you an indication of your organisation's current maturity. There'll be more coming out on that in the coming weeks. So, but to move forwards, we need to do something. We need to think about how do we actually move forwards, moving these things through these eras and figuring out where we are. So what we need to do is a practical sequence. Identify the business outcomes that matter the most. What is the biggest business impact? What is the critical data that hits those things the most? Follow that data through the real ecosystem. Follow it through, see what happens to it. Look at the actual processes and see how it's supposed to be done. And then, when we find the manual interventions and hidden dependencies, we need to look at those things and figure out what's creating the gaps that allow those things to exist. Then we have to think about clarifying the ownership, the accountability. Who has the decision rights over these sets of data? And then we have to think about prioritising fixing the root causes. So we want to fix the critical data first and then move through to the non-critical data as and when we end up with sufficient time on our hands and everything else is working perfectly, which might be the 12th of never. I'm not saying you'll ever get round to it, but it's not that important. And then what we need to do is make sure all of those things coming together enable us to embed data governance into the transformations, the data initiatives, and probably the AI delivery that we desire. And what we have to understand about all of that is that you cannot govern everything all at once. You cannot boil the ocean. If you try to do that, you'll get very frustrated, you won't get any engagement, and it's really difficult to achieve. So you need to start with the data that matters the most. So what else could help you do that? Well, I have my data ecosystem scorecard. And that, as an initial assessment, is a great way through a series of questions for you to understand just about where you are in terms of your ecosystem and potentially where that would put you in your data eras. So it helps you identify areas of your ecosystem that may need attention, but it's only a really initial high level first step. Because what you then might need to do is take a deeper next step. And for that, you might need the data ecosystem diagnostic. And that's helping to uncover those gaps and why those gaps exist. And the data ecosystem diagnostic helps you to decide whether your data initiatives succeed or stall. Because here's what I see, and I've seen this over so many years. Teams don't fail because they pick the wrong tool. They fail because nobody mapped the ecosystem before they started and bought the tool. And you see this all the time, and you still see it today. Vendors do great work in selling their products, no doubt about that. But the time it surfaces that you haven't really mapped it, you're 18 months down the road, you spent a ton of money, but actually you're not getting anywhere. In fact, you're losing engagement, you're losing support. And that's what this data ecosystem diagnostic exists to prevent, to help prevent those things happening. 90 minutes with me, we map the ecosystem end to end, find out where it's breaking or potentially it is breaking, and we can see which gaps will matter the most. We can also work out which ones it's probably safe for you to ignore. You leave with a written summary, your ecosystem, your gaps, and all ranked in an order that I would fix them with, but you have to take accountability for. So if you're planning a data or AI initiative in the next 12 months and you're not certain your foundations will hold, DM me and we can have a chat and we'll work out whether it fits. If you think it already fits, then put that in the comments. Put diagnostic in the comments and I'll happily arrange a call with you to go through the data ecosystem diagnostic. Likewise, if you want a link to the scorecard for an initial self-assessment, put scorecard in the comments and I will send you a link to that. So the key to all of this today was that organisations do not reach the AI era simply by introducing AI. It just doesn't work like that. They get there by understanding their data ecosystem. Then what have we got? Where is it? Etc. Strengthening the foundations and embedding data governance into how people actually work. So it becomes a day-to-day type thing. Because then the data maintains its quality. You have trust and confidence in the data. So you have to ask yourself, which era is your organisation actually in? Because you can work it out. And when you have that, it will signpost a way for you to improve. So next week on my live, I'm going to be talking about why organisations get stuck in the data swamp. So join me then and we'll go through some more about this exciting stuff around data eras. In the meantime, have a great rest of your day.